All right, well, welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors. Today we are going to talk about a pretty contentious topic, and that is tourniquet selection. So this is probably by far one of those topics that starts lots of fights, like what caliber is better, 9mm versus 45 ACV, that really floods forums and comment sections, but actually at the end of the day doesn't really matter. It doesn't make that much of a difference, and hopefully if you watch this video, I'll tell you why. So tourniquets have been used for a long time. Early tourniquets have been seen in history as far back as 600 BC in terms of medical application. One of the first persons to use a tourniquet in medical practice was a French physician in 1674. So tourniquets have been around for a long time. And a lot of tourniquets are improvised tourniquets, particularly tourniquets that are used in the field from a civilian perspective or from battle. So it's a cravat or a belt with a windlass like a stick, and that is that. Now, those tourniquets can occlude blood loss. They are effective, but they're not reliable. And so the market now has been flooded with tons and tons of different types of tourniquets that are much more reliable, much more usage. So we've gotten to the point in our medical advances that we don't need to rely on improvised tourniquets to stop the bleed. We actually have a tool that can do that for people. Now, the reason why tourniquets have become so popular is the advance in medical science, in particular tactical medical medicine, that had been really stagnant for a long time, since World War II up until really the Somali Wars. There wasn't a lot of development in medicine for battle. The conditions of the Iraq and Afghanistan war had really changed the game. Many more soldiers were wearing body armor, which left extremities exposed. The use of IEDs and other explosives really caused the need for the application of a tourniquet on a more widespread usage. And so that has then, the knowledge and the tools have all matriculated down into the civilian use for good reason. And so there's a lot of confusion, because some people come from a military perspective, some people come from a civilian perspective, and some people come from a highly trained perspective, and some people come from a not trained perspective. So before I go on too much farther, I would just want to explain that I, in full disclosure, have never applied a tourniquet in the field. And I think that's where a lot of this confusion comes from, is from individuals sharing information that they've regurgitated, but not from actual experience in the field or from any kind of proper training. My proper training, or my highest degree of medical training, is wilderness first responder. I had that as a wilderness guide. Since then, I've stayed current with wilderness first aid, and currently I'm not a certified medical professional or trained person at all. So if there is information that's new or information that I have shared that is wrong, I really highly encourage people to get into the comment section and throw in your experiences that you've had with the tourniquets, or corrections if I've shared anything that you feel that might be wrong. So oftentimes what people do, in particular in the gun community, is that they focus on what the tip of the spear does, special forces, and they look at what military does as kind of that gold standard, but without thinking about or applying the different types of conditions that are, or the conditions that are different from a military perspective versus a civilian perspective. So, special forces are going to have individually different levels of training. They'll all have a that is going to be in close proximity to them with an even higher level of training. So they have kind of a buddy system that's completely different than a civilian that's out on their own. Or even these smaller groups of people that individuals have a quote unquote assigned medic who is essentially just a person who carries bandages or more medical gear than others, but doesn't really have any proper training or any advanced medical tools like drugs or blood transfusion kits and so on that in a military context they would, but they want to still apply the same tool to themselves. Civilians don't have oftentimes the medical support that military has. The tactical or the trauma, the experience of trauma medicine in hospitals are mainly focused in around urban areas where you see more gunshot wounds and knife wounds and things of that nature. So even the care in the care chain isn't as advanced as it would be in like a special operations context. And then also the response and other types of support is not the same. Although in cities you see, most developed cities have a 4 to 10 minute response time for police or fire. Not all places have that response or outside of major areas, and in rural areas in particular, where response time is greater, that's going to change things immensely. Military often have medevac waiting for them. A helicopter is going to take them to the finest doctors, the best doctors, and have medical support on that transport. So you have that medical support that you need on the ground by buddy care and by a medic on the helicopter, and then a trained staff at the hospital. And we don't have that chain care as civilians uniformly. And then lastly is the application. So in most cases, tourniquets around the world aren't applied like they are in the United States because the environment is different. In the United States, gun violence is greater. A leading cause of death amongst children is gun violence in America. Particularly in urban populations, those that suffer the greatest degree of traumatic injuries from gunshots in particular, and penetrating injuries are individuals within the African American community, which is twice as much as those in the white community, which dominates this conversation. The Stop the Bleed programs that have been very successful in the United States and are very good programs often don't reach the marginalized communities that actually suffer the high increase of gun violence that's actually seen. So again, most people who are talking about this type of thing aren't really talking from any kind of real experience. All that being said, we need to think about stopping the bleed and using a tourniquet to do that. So what tool we would go for and why is then that important question. So perhaps kind of the gold standard or the standard tourniquet, in which all tourniquets are oftentimes compared to, of these four main tourniquets that I have before you, is the North American Rescue CAT tourniquet. There are multiple generations of this tourniquet, and there's also multiple variations, particularly on Amazon, that you can get cheaper versions of this or replica versions of this. They are not very dependable. So if you're looking for a good tourniquet, this is a good place to start. And the reason for that is that it is the type of tourniquet that most military and fire and police in many communities are trained on. And so when we're talking about buddy care, we're talking about familiarity of tools. This is probably one of the most common. A variation of this particular tourniquet is the soft T tourniquet, which was designed for Special Forces community. It's essentially the same tourniquet, just a little bit different. This particular one is wider, so it's the soft TW or soft T wide, which is going to be a little bit more effective with minimizing tissue damage. The wider that tourniquet, the less damage potentially that can occur. This is a heavier, more robust tourniquet. Perhaps the biggest difference is that this tourniquet, the CAT tourniquet, is a one-time use tourniquet. It's designed for one-time use. And so you use it and then it gets discarded. It has a polymer windlass, it has Velcro, it's lighter than the soft T. But again, it operates in the same way. Soft T has a metal windlass. It has a metal instead of Velcro tensioning device. And so the Special Operations community had wanted a different, slightly more expensive tourniquet that didn't have Velcro with the fear of mud and water and things like that that could make the Velcro slip. And in terms of their application, where they needed a tourniquet that could be used multiple times, the SWAT T kind of came out of those very specific needs. So the CAT tourniquet and the SWAT T are very much, in terms of operation, very much the same. And so it's just a matter of what you want in terms of budget and weight and so on. But if someone sees something like this in many of the that have taken Stop the Bleed courses or other types of courses, they're going to know exactly what to do with this type of tourniquet. As I said, because this is a one-time use tourniquet, if you're doing training or refreshers and things, you're going to really want to have a training tourniquet to practice with and keeping your CAT tourniquets fresh. Whereas the soft T can be used multiple times. So there's that too, just in consideration. The other types of tourniquets that you'll see are the SWAT and the RATS tourniquet. These tourniquets are not TCCC approved. So what that means is that the Department of Defense, under the umbrella of the Department of Defense, there's a organization called TCCC, the Tactical Combat Casualty Care. They are the ones that decide what tourniquets are going to be used by the Department of Defense in different capacities. And they basically say that, these are the type of tourniquets that are going to be used out in the field. They have certain applications or certain considerations, such as robustness, being able to work on the rough environment of the battlefield, being able to be applied one-handed, and so on and so forth. So there are specific needs that, say, a soldier might need that quite often in civilian terms isn't necessary. So just because a tourniquet is not TCCC approved doesn't mean that it doesn't work. So there wouldn't be a product out on the market that's not going to not work. So to think that you can't have other tourniquets because they're not TCCC approved, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They're still going to work. In fact, in terms of occluding blood loss, the SWAT T can actually do just as good of a job in some studies as the CAT tourniquet. But are you going to be able to apply it with one hand? No. So again, in terms of doing its job, these tourniquets, although they're not TCCC approved, they're not improvised tourniquets, so they're going to work more dependably, more effectively than not having a tourniquet at all. You just have to know why they're not TCCC approved or what their limitations essentially are. So let's talk a little bit about these two types of tourniquets and when and why you would want to use them. So the SWAT-T stands for stretch, wrap, and tuck. So it's not a tourniquet that's issued to SWAT team members in the police forces. That is the acronym. You stretch it, you wrap it, and you tuck it. It is very similar in application to a lot of the kind of the rubber, cheap throwaway tourniquets that you see used in hospitals. The thing I like about the SWAT-T is that it's easy to use. A lot of times people think that, well, I'm going to get myself this tourniquet because I'm going to be the one applying the tourniquet onto myself. And if you're suffering from some kind of traumatic injury, you may not be conscious or capable of actually applying the tourniquet onto yourself, or you may not have practiced or trained for that. And in that case, if you're in that situation, you may be relying on a civilian to put, or a person who's untrained to put that tourniquet on you. And so the SWAT-T even has so simple that it even has directions on how to apply that tourniquet on there. So if you're not familiar with tourniquet usage, someone can get at least some kind of pressure onto that wound and help control some of that bleeding. So there is a good argument for civilian use of the SWAT-T in that you're relying not on a team, but a random person coming across a motor vehicle accident or whatever to apply that medical aid. One of the nice things about the SWAT-T is that it's a multiple use tourniquet. So, if we're talking about wilderness travel, for example, musculoskeletal injuries are by far the more common. You don't need or they require often a tourniquet out in a wilderness context, just because, again, that level of ballistic energy or energy on those mechanisms of energy of injury are just not that great. And so you can control a lot of bleeding, a lot of different types of bleeding with pressure points and pressure bandages than you would ever need, you would very rarely need a tourniquet for. So the likelihood of needing something like to help you with a sprain, a broken bone, a sling, and things of that nature, or as a pressure bandage, the SWAT-T can do all those things. So it's really kind of a multi-tool of a tourniquet. I like to say that these tourniquets also work really well in conjunction with with the TCCC kind of standard tourniquets, in that this might be a tourniquet that you would have on your person, and this would be a tourniquet that you could keep in a pack or in a car, or in a less accessible place. If you come across the need for a tourniquet, say in a mass casualty environment, that if you need one tourniquet, quite often you'll need a second tourniquet either on that same patient or on other people. So having more tourniquets or multiple tourniquets is advantageous. So even if you do have a standard tourniquet, having kind of the quote-unquote non-standard tourniquet or a different variety of types of tourniquets can be helpful. Now, most traumatic or puncture or penetrating wounds are experienced by individuals between the ages of 18 and 40. So in that context, people, and particularly males that are, higher testosterone means higher risk taking. Higher risk taking means more potential injury. This tourniquet is going to serve well for those populations. But for smaller, slighter people, this type of tourniquet might not be as functional. So for small children or even dogs, a tourniquet like this is going to work on all people of all sizes and shapes. So again, when you're looking at the civilian population of very overweight people, very slender people, different types of body shapes that are not as uniform as a soldier's body would be in terms of age and shape and size and weight, that SWAT T has that place. The other advantage to the SWAT T is that it requires less. It requires only gross motor skills, and so it's not as kind of an intricate of application that these tourniquets are. So that's one of the reasons why training on these tourniquets is so important versus something like this. It's very grippy, so if it's wet, there's blood, there's snow, there's rain, there's mud, you're going to be able to function under stress in bad environments with something like this too. So another advantage. Whereas, if this Velcro does get wet or is worn out for whatever reason, people wear these tourniquets oftentimes in accessible locations, which means it exposes it to UV light. And UV light will degrade that nylon pretty quick. So if you had a failure of your tourniquet, it's because of it being exposed. So that's one reason why you'd always want to carry these in a pouch to some degree, or to protect it to some degree from the elements. So really, this is a great option, a great backup tourniquet for some people, a great primary tourniquet for some people. It all kind of depends. Now, let's enter in the RATS tourniquet, rapid application tourniquet. Again, not TCCC approved, but this is a very common tourniquet out there, and it's often the tourniquet that starts a lot of fights. It does a lot of the same. It has a lot of the same benefits as the SWAT T in terms of its multiple use. The problem with this tourniquet is that, or one of the some of these issues, is that once you apply a tourniquet like the RAT tourniquet or even the SWAT tourniquet, it's harder to back off on that tourniquet. So once a tourniquet like the RATS tourniquet is applied, it needs to stay applied until they get to medical care. So if you're, for example, if you've controlled the bleed of a wound with the tourniquet, and you're able to keep that pressure on that with a pressure bandage, and then reapply this tourniquet to another location or another person, that gives you some great flexibility. Whereas with the RATS tourniquet, once this thing is applied, it pretty much needs to stay on. It's very, very simple to apply. You can do it one-handed. It's essentially just a piece of kind of like rubberish rope with a cleat. So you can use this thing for lots of different applications, medical and otherwise. Its greatest advantage, though, against these other three tourniquets is its size. It's extremely lightweight, it's extremely compactable, and you can carry it on your person. I myself have carried this down a pant leg. I've carried this around my ankle, just wrapping around my ankle. Right now, most of the time I carry this in a pack. But if you need a tourniquet in a low vis or low profile way or carrying, there is no tourniquet better than the RATS tourniquet in terms of its usability. Why do I say this is something that's important? Is because a tourniquet that you have on your person is going to be better than not having a tourniquet on your person. One thing I learned from, say, wilderness canoeing is that if you have a lighter boat, people with lighter boats tend to use those boats more. It's just easier to put on the top of their car and get out. So if you have a heavy first aid kit, if you have bulky first aid items, you're more likely to not have those on your person all the time. Whereas a tourniquet like this, that's very easy to carry, very lightweight to carry, means that you're going to have that tourniquet on your person potentially more likely than some of these others. So there's this saying that any knife is a survival knife, meaning that although a Swiss Army knife sucks in many ways as a survival knife, it's the knife that you have on your person that becomes that survival knife. And in that regard, the rat's tourniquet works. So in a civilian perspective, in a travel perspective, in an extreme covert perspective, the rat's tourniquet has a place. On the battlefield, within a medical structure and training and buddy care and all the things that go into military a military perspective, the rat's tourniquet doesn't. And so you see a lot of people that will talk disparagingly about this tourniquet, but not often think about the full application of the tourniquet. So just because it's not TCCC approved, again, doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It's very simple to work. You just wrap it 3 times around, lock it with a cleat, and you're good to go, just like with the SWAT T. There isn't a complex form of Velcro or buckles and windlass and so on and so forth. It's just a rapid application. Get it on that wound and get some help. So if you know the limitations of the tools that you have, and you weigh out the pros and cons, I think that you can find the tourniquet that's right for you. For individuals that are looking to get into the stop the bleed mentality and being a prepared civilian citizen, then this cat tourniquet is probably the best option for most people, most situations, particularly if you're working within a team structure or professional capacity. For the non-professional, non-trained individual, the SWAT T is a great option. And then for those that are needing the everyday carry, the needing more a covert solution, a more low-key, low-profile solution, or again, wanting a backup tourniquet, some application, those that are working in, those that are in a city where they have close proximity to medical facilities, that rat's tourniquet works as well as also. So, higher degree of training, standard degree of training, no training, and this fills in many of those gaps, in my opinion. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, like I said before, put them down below, and stay tuned for more videos. They're on the way.